Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment Scrutiny Committee. My name is Tom Bennett and I'm the chairman of this committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is also being live streamed on YouTube, so for anyone who's watching, I don't know where the camera is there, I think, is that right? Yeah. So for anyone who's watching from home, welcome to you too. Before we proceed with the meeting, I've just been asked to remind people to make sure your mobile phones are on silent. And we will start the meeting, as we always do, with 72 seconds silent to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. Right, before we move to the agenda, I just want to give my particular thanks, or committee's particular thanks to members of the public and local organisations that have joined us this evening. We always try and encourage as much public involvement in these meetings as possible, so it's a real pleasure to see it so well attended. Right, item one is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Hamish Adurian, who sadly is not well this evening, but it looks like everyone else is here. Declarations of interest. Does anyone, I have a declaration, but does anyone else have a declaration? No. So I'm declaring an interest on the first item, the flood risk working group. My business works in flood risk technology, and so I have a conflict of interest with this item. As such, I've remained entirely uninvolved from the working group, and have not been involved or consulted on the recommendations. And indeed, if it comes to a vote this evening, I will recuse myself from the vote. So I think everyone can be confident that I haven't had any involvement in that. Right, so now move on to minutes. Members of the committee, happy for me to formally sign off the minutes with, yes, Councillor Dubut. This is just regarding the minutes from the previous meeting.
Yes, I just would like to mention that because I wasn't in the room, you approved them partially. I just need one small amendment, which is just adding plain English trees. And I would like to point out that we already had this conversation about amending minutes in regards to Holland Opera House. And I looked on the website, they are still not amended. So I think this needs to be looked properly, but minutes should be kept more accurately.
Yeah.
And it will amend the absolute minute.
Okay, well let's discuss this further after the meeting. In terms of these, the minutes from the last meeting though, are you happy and are the members happy for me to sign those off? Yeah. Okay. Right, so just to let you know, we're moving the agenda around just a tiny bit this evening. We're moving the A6, which is the Air Quality Action Plan, to the end, but otherwise the meeting is unchanged. So we'll be starting with the flood risk management working group report. Probably wise, lest all the other items be considered antediluvian. And unfortunately, Councillor Durian is not able to present this item this evening because he's unwell. He's sent through some comments for me to read out, and James Diamond, who is involved with the working group throughout, will also make some comments regarding the report, and I'm sure members have seen the report itself as well. So the comments from Councillor Durian are: this has been a challenging and in-depth piece of work, and we've taken our time to probe as much as possible all the different aspects of flood risk management as relevant to our borough, making sure that residents' voices can be heard and be at the centre of the process. The work is by no means complete, and the recommendations will need to feed into London-wide activity, bringing together local authorities, the GLA, and national government. I call on the committee to agree to pass on these recommendations to the leadership team. May I thank my fellow working group members for all their efforts, as well as our excellent officer team. And James, would you like to
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So,
introduce the report?
by way of introduction, I would just point out to the committee that the Environment Select Committee does have a statutory remit to scrutinise flooding risk in the borough. The Environment Select Committee set up the working group in response to the July 2021 flooding, which had such a devastating effect on residents, businesses and communities. And the ESC gave the working group a mandate to look into the circumstances of the flooding and also to report on what future mitigations could be taken as well to reduce flooding in the future. As Councillor Dorian has said, residents and the resident voice was built into the working group's inquiry. The working group made sure that residents were given spaces on the agenda to be able to speak and to be able to make points at the evidence sessions. And the working group also set up a call for evidence at which residents could report their experiences in detail. And I think altogether this is probably one of the most significant inquiries we've done as part of the scrutiny function at the council. There were 5 separate evidence sessions, and the working group heard from Thames Water, it heard from the Environment Agency, it heard from the officers of the council, and it also heard from the chair of the independent expert group who led on the London Flood Review as well. So I think altogether it builds up a significant amount of evidence, and the report has 19 separate recommendations, most of which are for Thames Water and for the council. So it's the task for ESC tonight to discuss and to agree the final report and recommendations, and then they can go to the council and to Thames Water for a final formal response. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just to sort of reiterate a couple of those points, to remind the committee, it's been an enormous amount of work done, which many of you were involved in pulling together this report. So it's, for this item, we're not scrutinising the report because the report is itself scrutiny. But any comments or questions which we want to add at this point, it's certainly very welcome. Joanna.
Thank you. Can I very much reiterate what James and yourself have said, that I think this has been a very good report and involved residents, and I know a number of residents are here tonight, and I thank them all for their input. The officers, I think, have done a tremendous amount of pulling witnesses together and pulling together a very salient report, as well as the chair and the working group members. So our thanks on behalf of Adrian, Hamish, to himself as well. For me, the big take with this is very much the fact that it needs to raise awareness. So I think a lot of the flooding that happened in 2021 was unexpected. It was flash flooding. But what it has done is it's identified weaknesses in particular areas that even if there is flooding again, those same premises will be hit again. But also, if you look at the statistics of flooding risk, actually the south of the borough is much more at risk, even to flooding on a 3 or 5 yearly basis. and yet most residents, I don't believe, are even aware of that. So I think we've got a job as a council working with Thames Water and with others to very much raise awareness and to raise awareness about what steps they can take, where they're going to turn to when a flood is happening and after a flood. And I think one of the major points that came out through talking to residents was those who've been affected is the challenge of insurance, both making a claim and seeking reinsurance, and either that not being available or that being available at prohibitively large premiums or excluding flood risk. And actually, I think we as a council should be working with DEFRA and the Association of British Insurers to actually look at what can we do to help more of our premises in this borough be covered by insurance, for example, Flood Ray, which actually excludes any block with more than 3 flats in it. So for me, I very much commend this report, and I would like to see us very much take the reins, working with us in partnership to actually make ground on so many of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any other comments? Or,
No, really to endorse what Joanna said.
Yeah.
And I think then a lot of work needs to be, a lot of pressure needs to be put on the ABI and DEFRA.
Yeah.
Because there are things that really need to be changed that we
Yeah.
don't at present control. And we also need a few more answers from Thames Water, particularly about the mysterious disappearance of water that just happened to coincide with the Lots Road pumps going on,
Yeah.
although we're told it had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, no, I read that with interest. Yeah. Well, no, I think that's a good point, and it's clear that while some items are within the direct control of the council, predominantly the work that needs to be done is highly collaborative and involves other organisations like Thames Water and DEFRA, so working together with them constructively, but also holding them to account where necessary is going to be absolutely crucial if these recommendations are to be implemented successfully. Would anyone else? Aaron?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to request I'm sure the leadership team have read the report. It's a great report, and thanks to all colleagues who've worked on and the officers as well. Just on behalf of all the residents, we request the leadership team to take this forward to the MP and DEFRA, all those ministers that get involved, to ensure that act on some of the things that we've produced in the report, basically, like risk management plan, work with Met Office, etc. And then, prevention is better than cure, and then that's what we believe in the report, that there's many things as a framework that brings out so we can prevent. Maybe we can't stop the floods, but we can prevent some of these things that happen. So request the leadership team to take it seriously.
Yeah. Absolutely. Eva?
I can just add that thank you very much for all hard work, and thank you very much to residents who really find time to attend so many meetings in person and brought to our attention issues which they experience themselves firsthand. Some of them are very heartbreaking cases, and I see that there is so much to improve. And I think leadership could literally take this report on board. There are some little things that can be done quite easily, like SATs will have fund. So the report more or less encompasses everything which was brought to our attention, and I think it's quite thorough, and thank you very much for all the hard work, because there were some amendments, but eventually we come to the final report. So I think we covered during all these weeks everything actually could cover, from businesses to private landlords suffering and private ownership, and from family to SATs as well, and global warming. So everything is more or less in that report, and it's very nicely laid out, quite straightforward, easy to read. So I think the product is there now to leadership to take it forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Members of the public, yes.
we Vincent Emery, Holland Ward. I want to thank you very much for this report. I have read it. It is extremely good, and I was delighted to see you did not let Thames Water off the hook. You were very firm, and it was brilliant. And I'm really grateful for the amount of effort that's been put in by the council on this. Could I just say as a note of joy, I hope, to people who can't get flood insurance, 41 flats, so we didn't come within flood ray, but we have managed to negotiate with Aviva flood insurance. However, it is £5,600 per flat, just for the flood insurance, each year for the next 3 years, and then that will be 5 years since the flood, and then they may put it down. But we had to do that because people could not sell their properties. So it's doable, but it's jolly difficult to get. Thanks.
No, that's well. Thank you for that, and that's good to hear that it is possible, even if it's very dear. Would anyone else like to make a contribution or ask a question?
I just want
Sorry, yes, Joanna.
one aspect. It became very clear when we started that the MP has X number of cases that have, of claimants or people that have written to her about flooding risk. We have a different number.
Yeah.
Thames Water has a different number, and the working of the rationale of data privacy stops lots of that from being shared, and it is highly frustrating. And you find that residents get frustrated or indeed confused as to who they've given their information to, and lots of the information that's given to Thames Water then appears to get lost. And so it would be fabulous if there could be some form of data sharing. And I appreciate that there may be council and Thames Water data sharing, but actually we need a bigger ability to share data. And I think that needs to go probably up to an even higher level.
Yeah. No, it sounds someone needs to be tasked with holding the master list, and the organisations need to obtain the permissions to share it, which requires a bit of work, but would be very useful. Yes, Linda.
Can I just, this as a note, saying I'm still waiting for Thames Water to come back on their mitigations for the Earls Court properties, including St Cuthbert's Church.
Yeah.
We've been waiting some time for them to come back. They have had the opportunity for work forward. We have waited some time.
Well, maybe could we minute that and see if we can do anything to
I think it's
speed up
unacceptable for a very listed church to be under.
Is that are you requesting that meeting via the council or directly
Yes,
from the
we
church?
had, the first meeting was actually after the flood, and then we went through James Blake.
Yeah.
We had a walk around. We went through the different properties in Earls Court as samples
Yeah.
of the problem.
Yeah.
But we were told this was sometime last year that they would come back.
Okay. Well, no, we'll take a minute to chase up on that and see if we can speed that up. Yes.
Yeah. One of the things I found very concerning when I attended the Thames Water drop-in was they referred to the first clearance of 135 most vulnerable residents who we dealt with. They provided no supporting evidence of the criteria of vulnerability, and I know that the report has picked that up. But anecdotally, I quoted the example of one person who carried 3 children under the age of 5 to a window that they had to break to get them out of the basement. They said, oh, if only we'd known, that person would have been much higher up on our list.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, how carefully compiled was this list? There were a lot of questions about this.
And it seems highly arbitrary to say 135 most vulnerable. From one area to the next, that would be significantly differing degrees of vulnerability. So, no, I think that's a very fair point, and I'm sure one would encourage officers to take up on future conversations with Thames Water.
And to put the £10 million which they've agreed to spend on flood mitigation in some context, that's, when you think how much Sarah Beanie is being paid for her performance-related sign-on of 3 years and her annual salary, that amounts to the 3-year package.
Yeah.
So they quote an astronomical sum of £1 million, the electrification pumping station, which the fire referred to.
Yeah.
These are very small sums of money compared to the recompense paid to a single senior executive.
Yeah.
And I do think that that needs probing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think questions need to be asked about precisely what performance she is being rewarded for, particularly given the second wave of Lord Hollick's investigations into water purity, the pollution of watercourses.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. The only thing is the more sort of the broader we get in our discussions with Thames Water, and the more outside our sort of immediate borough we get, perhaps the less likely we are to drive through our most significant points. But I think it's relevant as a point of reference as regards to the amount they're paying. So I think we can certainly make a note of that. Would anyone? Yes.
Very quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to echo what colleagues have said already about the thoroughness of the report, and to thank those who are on the working group. I'm conscious of how much work there still is left to do to get to the bottom of this. I just had a quick query, perhaps for Councillor Gardner or for somebody on the working group, because under recommendation 10A, it says the leadership team to consider how planning policy can be used to encourage the highest possible permeability in private gardens. But then under in the report, under basements and planning policy on page 33, the report says that there's at least the studies that were done over a decade ago claim that there is no proof that basements contribute to flooding. And I just wanted to touch on that slightly, because that sort of seems slightly contradictory to me, in the sense that if we want gardens to be permeable, putting a load of concrete underneath them doesn't seem like the best way of doing that. And I was just wondering, I guess from your point of view, in terms of things like perhaps more if technology has moved on, more studies into the impact, particularly given we've had far more basements being built since then, into that, and what perhaps you would want, I think the council should be doing, and perhaps maybe restricting that even further. For Mrs. Lambert.
Yes, there's a bit of confusion here, because when one refers to basements, there are basically two categories of basements. They're the existing ones that we've had since Victorian times.
Sort of lower ground floor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there are these really underground ones that actually, although people say they cause flooding, there's been no proof of the fact. That hitherto, I mean, we're always on the lookout for evidence, but nobody's produced any actual evidence. There's anecdotal stuff, but it doesn't stand up, unfortunately. As regards the old style basements, there the fear is that water will rush into them, as it did, unless measures are taken to stop that water reaching. And clearly having soakaways in gardens is one of the big things that we think ought to be done. And I know Jonathan Wade shivers whenever I suggest an article more directive, but what we really need is something that allows planning control over the paving, impermeable paving of gardens, so that they can operate as soakaways. As regards basements built under gardens, they always have to have a metre of topsoil above them, and as far as I can remember, not take up more than a certain proportion of the garden.
50%.
So in fact, it's I doubt whether that's a major issue. It's just that we walk through the streets, and as Darren and I say to each other, because we walk the same streets, we see yet another paved garden, and there's nothing we can do about it.
I think that's a very good point.
One of the points was about SADs, so the more greenery we introduce, helping the air quality, and at the same time water stays on those green roofs or green gardens. So instead of going to the sewer and overflowing, open space on a surface, so the more green spaces we introduce in gardens and in open spaces like streets, then we are hoping with managing the funds. So this was the whole idea behind it, on a surface.
Yeah.
If you went on this, so it's not bad.
Yeah.
And I think, actually,
Joanna.
just to go back to Roberta's point, I think the point of recommendation 7 is actually to say, is there a cumulative impact of these basements? So when we last carried out the OVAR assessment back in, I think, 2012, it was at that stage, and there was no evidence found in that review. However, actually, have things changed, or indeed, and forgive me, James, this is where you get into the flow, as opposed to those basements themselves don't flood, but it's actually whether it's causing anything to the ground source water that has to flow around it, and whether that's changed the roofing in a negative way. So I think we were suggesting that perhaps it might be timely to have a look. There's a lot of residents raised that as a concern, and it was actually either to put their minds at risk or actually say, no, actually, over time we are now seeing a change, and actually does that need to impact the policy? I think the second point about encouraging more open spaces and very much the sort of permeability is you always see people add to their paving, but you rarely see a garden revert from paving back to the garden. And actually, is there some way we can incentivise residents to do that, or actually to think, I can do suds in a domestic capacity as opposed to suds which are required on a large development and are automatic. So let's get our residents' mindset to change such that they go, yes, I can do this, and wouldn't this be good for biodiversity, wouldn't this be good for the neighbouring area?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm going to wrap up the item there, but before I do, Ms. Wade, I know there's
So
probably...
can I make one more
Yes.
point for you?
Go ahead.
And that is, on one of the big beefs is that nobody's given any information about what people can do to protect their properties.
Okay.
And this is very much, it's sort of an after you've crawled situation. Because we're told, oh well, Thames Water's doing something, London councils are doing something, we must wait and see what they're going to do. And I think at some point we need to cut the Gordian knot, and pending all these other larger bodies, the borough ought to have its own information pack that it can distribute to tell residents what they can do to flood-proof their property, and also what they can do when there is a flood.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Mr. Wade, I know the report has not been formally submitted to the council yet for response, but would you like to make any initial comments on planning policy or anything you've heard this evening?
Well, I think, to begin with, I think it's, having had a read through the report, I think it's a very good report actually, and I think, I'd add my congratulations because it's deduced, I think it's sort of bottom up a bit here with residents sort of intimately involved, which actually is, I think, makes it much stronger. I think it also provides a really good basis for some discussion with Thames Water, because it's understandable, but as a sort of statutory body, they do tend to sort of rely on their sort of statutory duties, and to try and ask them at slightly more challenging questions can be difficult. So I think providing these recommendations does form a really good basis to be able to start that conversation. I'm partly here because James Latham is within one of my teams, and so hooking up planning policy, local plan, greening, and flood mitigation is incredibly important. So that's what we will do. I was been around in the council a long time, so I was here for the 2012 basement work, and we did have to collect a lot of evidence for that. And this issue about sort of flooding in basements did come up as one of the big issues, and we did spend quite a lot of time looking at it. I think it basically, I think there was a couple of things. There's one about sort of would water levels rise if basements were put in, and it basically really it was found there really wasn't much effect. I think one of the things that we did make sure that happened, and Sophia's mentioned it, is to make sure that They didn't cover more than 50% beneath the garden. And also, perhaps more importantly, there was at least a metre of soil on top, so that water would, I mean, the main thing with flooding is to slow water speeds down so that it doesn't discharge very quickly into the sewer, so that it can gradually discharge. So I think in terms of that was successful. I think one of the other things that was interesting that we did use for evidence was aerial photos to show how where people are putting basements, there's a lot more hard standing, and the character of rear gardens was substantially changing from being characterised by sort of green spaces with mature vegetation into sort of lots of hard standing. And I think there's a little bit of a fad perhaps to do that. I'd like to think that that's been reversed a little bit. I think the other thing we are doing is we're producing a reading householder's guide. So that will cover a number of different aspects, but it certainly will cover subs. So I'd like to think that we could encourage our residents to do more than they're doing. There is an issue with Article 4. It's very difficult to sort of, do a whole borough Article 4 to say that, every time someone puts a hard standing down, they require planning permission. And I don't think, if I was honest, we would get very far with that. So I think it's one where we probably, I think this report will really help, but I think there's work we can do to certainly encourage residents to do more and show them the sort of things that could really make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly as someone who sits on the planning committee, I can say when something is, as I'm sure you know already, when something's in front of us, because it does need planning, flooding is always something we consider, and sometimes even if something gets hard standing out the front, they might have water storage tanks underneath, for example. So there are things being done, but I think the opportunity now, particularly with this report, to look at what else can be done is very welcome. Right, colleagues, so I think the plan would be that we, and as I say, I'll recuse myself, but we vote on agreeing the final report with all the recommendations. That will then, assuming we do that, will go to officers to consider, provide us their responses. We'll then bring it back to committee with the responses in July. With the first meeting of the next municipal year. Would it be July?
It will be from 29th of June.
29th of June. So we'll agree that timeline with them, but hopefully we can get it back to 29th of June. And then we can also, after that, we can bring it to full council and sort of formalise the whole thing and the recommendations that are being adopted at full council. So then it'll become council policy. Colleagues, are you all happy with that plan and to formally agree the reports and the recommendations? Yeah, agreed. I note that as agreed with just me recusing myself, but everyone else agreed. Great. Well, thank you very much everyone who joined us for that item, and of course thank you for all the work you did before today, contributing to that report. So we're now moving on to item A5. Let's pause a second, Tom. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. For anyone watching, I realise I forgot to do it on the previous item, but just by way of introduction, we're joined by Councillor Kamali, who's lead member for Planning, Place and Environment, by Mark Chetwin, who's head of Transportation and Highways, and by Caroline Dubarbier, who is Sustainable Travel Manager. Thank you for joining us. So this is a report summarising the Centre for London reports. We're not actually really scrutinising the Centre for London report itself, which was a third-party report, but this report summarises it and provides the response from the citizens panel, which was very much informed by this report. And we got responses from a number of residents who were on the citizens panel as to their opinions on a wide variety of topics as set out in that report. Would you like to introduce the report?
I think this is a topic that is well known to residents and members of Kensington and Chelsea. It was obviously sort of as part of the report that we commissioned way back a year and a half ago. I was very keen that the Citizens Panel, so one of the bodies where we have recruited a number of representative residents, of around 2,000, were asked some of the questions, some of the findings from that report, as well as some sort of more broad sort of data gathering exercise really from our residents to see what they think about things in principle. Obviously the world has moved on that much further. The initial report was a sort of post-COVID, how the world is changing, to see how people are changing their commutes and getting around the borough. Obviously time has marched on even further when we went to our residents through the Citizens Panel. As with any of these surveys, there's never a perfect answer that comes out of it, but I think it's been interesting to see some of the findings and some of the breakdowns that are featured here tonight. One of the clearest ones clearly is the breakdown of the residents that did respond. I think it's clear, we all know that in general there's about a 35%, 40% take up of car usage per household. Those that chose to respond, and I should point out that they're we asked all 2,000, but only a certain number volunteer their time to answer the questions. Of those that did respond, it was around 65%, I believe, had access to a car. So there's the implication that there could be a potential bias within some of the answers was something I drew down on at the beginning when I first saw these answers, and I asked officers to do further research into it to see if those figures really did carry through between those that own cars or those that didn't, or whether there was a broader consensus that was forming sort of under the headline figures. I'm sure they'll be able to present some of those tonight. But yeah, it's really here for questions, I suppose.
Can I just add that we're looking to have Rob Whitehead, who's one of the lead author of the Centre for London Report, who's interested enough to see what the discussion is like tonight.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. And I should add, we're also lucky to be joined by a representative from Better Streets, and do we have also someone from London Cycling Campaign? Yes. Well, thank you both very much for joining us. We'll invite you up in a moment. We're going to do questions from the committee first, and then we'll invite you up to make some comments and/or ask some questions. Anything else, Mark or Caroline? Happy to move to questions.
Right, since Jem mentioned this point about the overrepresentation in the respondents of people who say they have access to a car in their house. Represented by that. So we looked to see what difference that made to their answers on some of the questions. One particular one that's been raised with me outside of this meeting is there's a figure in the report on which paragraph is it? On paragraph 4.18, it talks about the number of opposition to specifically segregated bike lane in Kensington High Street. He was asked about it in general terms, for not saying streets in the borough. But in relation to Kensington High Street at the moment, the sort of net opposition, if you like, is 22 points. It was 31 support, 53 against, so it's net opposition of 22. That comes down to about 12 if you sort of weight, and adjust the figures to account for what Jem mentioned in his opening remarks about the overrepresentation of people who have cars in this number.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, I'm going to jump in and ask the first question, which is a more general question about the panel. How can we get it more representative in the future? So it's great having this representative group of 2,000, But if, someone who doesn't respond 3 or 4 reports, consultations in a row, they're in a sense denying their demographic or their multiple demographics that they're sort of there to represent a voice. So should we be advising, for example, the members of this group that if they don't respond 1 or 2 times in a row, that we'll replace them with someone else, or that they might be very happy for that to happen. I don't know. Are there other ways in which we can make the panel more representative in future?
So it sits with the communities team. The question sort of formulated a bit by them, but there's. I think we sort of got to think these are residents that had initially signed up voluntarily. I think there is a very small contribution, sort of voucher or something like that, that's given to them for their time. The organisation that compiled that list of 2000 did make sure that they were representative of the borough across all the wards, ages, ethnicities, demographics, etc. When it comes down to individual ones, I think this was actually a fairly good turnout for one of our citizens panel consultations. But of course, it's come with sort of a very clear age profile between the respondents. One mechanism could perhaps be a weighting formula, but on this paper we had so few people under the age of, 25, I suppose, that you would have to very heavily weight that 1%, those 3 people. I think it's a point worth taking back to the communities team to see how they can encourage either more of the 2000 to come forward, or actually just when they do put this out to check as they're going along whether or not there is that representation coming through.
Yeah. So I've got a few other questions, but I'll go to colleagues first. Arian.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question, because, and I can see there's more support from North Kensington as opposed to South. If you look at the residents, the people that would suffer more in terms of putting aside the nitrogen, whether it's traffic or noise or more air pollution, is the one that's who live close to the nitrogen, close vicinity, right? You could have a North Kensington that would probably never visit nitrogen for about a couple of months, maybe. So I don't know if you have stats that who live close to nitrogen. It really help in the future consultation.
Ask questions about how often they're in against, how often they're on against hydrogen and how they travel. I don't think attitudes to the various different sort of design ideas by their familiarity or how they travel around the street. I don't think the research team, the consultation team, did that particular analysis. But all can be done. If the sample numbers are large enough, all that can be done.
But it's just a point to note that because people who live far away never visit Hatchcombe. It doesn't affect in any way.
There is also sort of breakdown of wards, isn't there? It's good to see that the wards close to High Street Kensington have quite high response rate.
Because I remember at one point it took me 30 minutes from Russell, which takes me 5 minutes when the cycle was put on. It took me 30 minutes. Russell, which normally takes me less than 10 minutes. So I was the one that would suffer a lot rather than someone doing more.
Reverse and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just to declare my interest as a Queensgate councillor. I note on that comparison list that the Chairman mentioned of ward representation, Queensgate, which is one of the border is way down near the bottom of that list. And so I was wondering what efforts were made to try and get more representatives from the question, and B, if there was any effort made at all in when the questions were asked or people the question was being sent to people to try and get a greater sample of those, as Councillor Etty said, on the people who would be directly affected by it. Because even conscious of, for example, as Councillor said in his ward, Holland, a lot of that's on the border with Holland Park. So a lot of the residents of Holland live closer towards Holland Park Avenue anyway. So just because the ward borders on it, Queensgate, I would say, is probably far more affected by any suggestion.
Well, again, so the Caroline and I were involved in the design of the questionnaire, but the survey was led by the communities team, as the experts in the consultation team. And I know that they did a series of reminders to all of the respondents who've been sent, the 2,000 who've been sent the questionnaire. Or the questionnaire. I don't think they made special efforts to, whether even they would have been monitoring it as they went along, where they would have had an idea of the number of total respondents. I gave them that number, but I don't think they necessarily would have been a breakdown by ward as they were going along. What I would say is the way I interpret this is, apart from the fact that the 3 of the 4 wards that have Kensington High Street going through it, and obviously not all the questions were about Kensington High Street, but many were those 3 of those 4 wards were the 3 highest, but actually 9%, which is Camden and Abingdon, is still 9% of 320 something. So the difference between 5% in the Queensgate ward and 9% in Camden and Abingdon of 320 is still 16 or something. It's not, in terms of the actual numbers of people from each ward responding, it's not that different. And I imagine that this is slightly unusual for the team in doing a survey that has a lot of questions about one particular area. So they would have expected, I think, I would have expected slightly more interest from the area closest to the high street.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not particularly surprised by this sort of distribution of figures.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, and this is not a consultation. This is a survey. So if you want a consultation on any ideas, I'm sure there's a lot more comments back from.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an important point. Yeah, this is a survey, not us as a council putting out plans and saying, please tell us what you think about these specific plans. It's useful in understanding attitudes rather than specific opinions.
Government guidance is increasingly pushing councils, encouraging councils towards doing something like this, where we're actually going out of our way to try and find out what people who may not have a particularly strong view think about things. But they're not saying we should do that instead of sort of traditional consultation. But it's the question you've raised about getting the level of interest is a good one. Particularly if you're doing consultations or research on very specific schemes.
But certainly people often talk about the silent majority, don't they? So it's good that we're making active efforts to try and get their voice. I had a question, I think, from Abdullahi first and then Laura.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is, the council rightly have spent resources and time in giving training to children and families to cycle and learn how to cycle. I mean, I'm wondering why on this consultation, the panel, we have no anyone who's either 18 or under. It's less than 1%. I mean, if there is. We also have, lucky to have in the council our youth, our parliament, who has volunteered and willing to help. So I think we are missing big chunk of information or contribution from our youngsters.
Yeah.
Which.
No, I think that's a fair point. I'll let Mark Jem answer, but I think there's also probably we might want to provide feedback to the communities team and sort of ask them what their plans are to increase youth participation in consultations like these.
I think that's a really good point. The youth council is excellent. They're really engaged, and there are a lot of our young residents. So I'm assuming the reason it's 18 plus is simply because it was adults only, was how the citizens panel was formed. But I think there's probably a good takeaway there that perhaps we should be looking at sort of a younger focused survey group as well, and how perhaps the youth council is the mechanism. Yeah, we could go through that. But yeah.
And I suppose because this isn't a consultation, much less a vote, it's information which is useful for us, and we have to take into account things like the fact that under 18s haven't been consulted. Colleagues, sorry, Laura.
Yeah,
yes.
So I have two. One is sort of just a query. When you have the sort of comparison of 53 cars per 100 households in the area compared to other areas. We have slightly higher, obviously. But is that, do you know how many people are in each household? Because we seem to have quite a lot more than, say, Westminster or Islington. However, we could have 10 people living in one household. So that's just a query. I don't understand if you can elaborate.
I don't know whether I don't know what the average size of a household in KC is compared with Westminster. The statistics there that you're operating on 3.5 total number of cars per household.
Yeah.
But as we've also said, and elsewhere in the report, there's also a figure from the census on. So some households have got more than one car. Basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's what I'm getting at. So, just have individual, so people ratio to cars rather than household ratio to cars in the area. You know, because like I say, you could have 100 houses, but in Westminster you have 50 people in those 100 houses, or you have like 200 people in those houses.
But it was still, it's looking at like household units, so
I know,
it's
but-
going to be between 1 and.
But it's per person, so there's more people, it's more densely populated, so therefore it's more.
And the further complication is, the question is about, do you live in a household where where there is access to a car?
Oh, so you don't, okay, so you're not saying each individual that has a car?
No.
That's.
No, go ahead.
But I mean, we do also know how many permits we issue.
Yeah.
And we know approximately how many houses we collect council tax from.
Yeah.
So we can do that, we can do that. So.
But for example, in a household, you can have 4 generations and they all drive different cars. So therefore the impact is greater. I don't know, I'm just curious. Anyway.
But in the statistic in 4.5 is interesting, 42% of households have access to one or more private cars. So that is,
my other question.
sort of contributes to the picture. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My other question was when you talk about widening pavements and also talking about cycle lanes, how does that work? So you're widening the pavements, narrowing the carriage and having a cycle lane. Would you do that, or is it either or?
I think it depends on the street, right? I suppose.
Well, High Street can.
But I think the way the questionnaire was presented was that each thing was a separate element. So the way the Centre for London report was put together, it had 3 options with elements within each option. Some of those elements appeared in more than one of those different options. But we thought to try to make it as simple as possible for the respondents and most useful for us as well, just to look at the ideal of pavement widening, both generally across the borough and then specifically in Kingston High Street. Same again with all the other different functions. So yes, there isn't a question about do you think if we do everything that's on this list, so you have to try and infer levels of relative levels of support for each one.
I mean, something that was nice going on paper, but the looking at the post-pandemic transport change, it's the walking is up 34%, car use is down 18%. If you net them off, it's only down 9%, and with walking is up 27%. But that's a marked difference in the way our residents are getting around. I think that's we've got to remember also that the vast majority of people are walking to one of their forms of transport as well. So it may be that they're walking in order to get on a bike or to get to the tube or something, but if it means they're walking more, that's great, and we should factor that in when we're looking at our movements and the width of our footways.
I have a question. So we've got the as an appendix questions that were asked in the survey. Do you know if any attempt was made to educate the respondents on the relative advantages and disadvantages of, for example, segregated versus counted cycles? Because some people might just, know what they are, but not know much about the two options.
So we provided photographs to try to illustrate what we meant. We were conscious that we talk in this language all the time, but not everyone does. So we've got examples of the 4 different kinds of cycling. But no, I think we tried to avoid saying what the benefits and disbenefits of each thing were. the questionnaire would become even longer now.
Yeah.
Would have gone
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, no, understood, and I suppose certainly agree with trying to get general attitudes from the public, and not everyone's going to have time to learn more about it. One thing which I thought was interesting, and again is probably largely due to what you said about the length of the report, and the longer it is, the fewer responses we'll get. But Centre for London's report did make some reference to the potential different treatment that would be required in central pinch point area. So, for example, when talking about segregated cycle lanes or cycle lanes in general, people's attitude for, oh, it's going to clog up the traffic, would probably impact their opinion on it. But the level to which it clogs up traffic is very dependent on where it is, and if it's in the pinch point versus not in the pinch point. Would be good to get your thoughts on that, and how people might think about different treatment for the tightest area versus the rest of the area.
Yeah, I don't think we specified in the questionnaire. Actually, no, we did. Did we distinguish the questionnaire between the critical section and the rest of it? So we thought about it, maybe we were told that's overcomplicated.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just organically, some of the responses are already thinking that way about Kensington High Street, because you can see that segregated cycle lanes, for example, are more supported generally in the borough, but on the way down to Kensington High Street, that support sort of waned a little bit. So, and I think that's just because people can picture that actual road, and or maybe they're remembering the former situation. So, yeah, we didn't go into that level of detail again. It's too small, but.
We're just checking, but yes, there were questions on what we call the section between Kent High Street and between Kent Church Street and Kensington Gardens.
Okay.
On page 77.
I'll take a look at that. And so just one other question, and I'll go on to Roberto. The report referenced that the painted lanes, for example, could be mandatory or advisory. Could you tell us the relative benefits of those two options?
Yeah, well, with the mandatory, the solid line, that means you're not allowed to drive, unless you're on a bike, you're not allowed to go into it, to move along. It doesn't actually override the parking and the waiting and loading. So that's still covered by, if there's a singular line, a double line, the loading and the curbside bits. So I think with a continuous mandatory line, it's that much more protection for sort of legal protection for cyclists. You shouldn't be driving into it unless it's to stop there.
And are there issues if someone is stopping, pulling over to stop? Are there any issues with it becoming more dangerous when it forces drivers are used to there being a cycle lane, and suddenly there's a cyclist swinging out of the lane to get around a taxi or drop off?
Certainly, you find plenty of examples on social media of people complaining about the cycle lane that's got a vehicle parked in it, whether that's parked legally or quite often the Twitter accounts are about it being parked illegally. So you can't prevent it completely, although the government does allow you, it does allow us now to enforce cycle lanes through CCTV.
Okay.
Thank you. So, just to help me understand some of this data here, we've got 4.26 in relation to Kensington High Street. Painted cycle lanes are supported by 43% of residents against 20% of opposing.
What page now?
67. And also 4.25, where you've got opposition of 20%, talking about cycle lanes specifically on Kensington High Street. Correctly. And then we go on to 4.29, where at the very end of that paragraph it says 41% stated that they don't want a cycle lane on Kensington High Street.
In relation to that question. So if we go back to 4.26, apologies to the committee, there's an error on line of that paragraph. So where it says against 20% you're opposing, Whereas the painted cycle lanes on the High Street, that should be 33%. So there's still net support of painted cycle lanes on Kensington High Street, but it's not as big as it's implied here. So there's apologies for that. But then I think the answer to the bigger point is that 41% said they didn't want the cycle lane on Kensington High Street. They're answering two separate questions, so they didn't necessarily need to be internally consistent.
Because that's specifically about
That's
the bi-directional or the.
Yeah.
How can you put that together where they're saying they don't want a bi-directional or with flow cycling, 41% are against having any, either sort of.
Well, it's the same.
Either or.
It's the same as where we asked them what in 4.27, which kind of cycle lane would they feel safest cycling on? And actually, the single largest response was, "Well, I've never cycled in London."
Yeah.
But we're still, and the 7% said none would make me feel safe. So some of those people may well have said in answers to other questions, "I don't think there should be any kind of cycle lane," but we still invited them to ask a question, to consider the question about, well, what would make you feel safest? So you're not answering one question earlier on in the questionnaire doesn't preclude you being asked all the other questions.
Yeah, obviously, because you could say I don't want to cycle lane, but if I were to cycle, I'd want a fortress built next to me to stop anyone
Yeah,
getting through.
yeah.
I mean that's totally different. But saying that you don't want either a bi-directional or a whatever they're called, bi-directional or with flow, you don't want either of those at all. When presumably you're going to have cycle lane, it's either or. You're going to either have one where they're both on one side or one where they're split across.
Yeah.
You sort of have three options there, as it were, compared to the sort of cycle lanes that you've asked for. You're not asking opposing questions, as it were, in the same way that you're asking a totally different question with how would you feel safest.
So I'm not sure.
So asking about if you're asking about support for painted cycle lanes on High Street Ken, and you're getting 33% opposing, presumably because the 20% is what is opposing generally in 4.25.
I think that's right. Yeah, 20% oppose them in general.
So there's a missing 8% there that are saying they don't support the cycle lane, whether I think flow or that are then saying that are not saying
is some of the issue that in some of these summary of the statistics, the don't knows have been taken out, and it's a straight yes versus no.
Yeah.
And in other summaries, the don't knows are included.
Should we take that away as an action?
Because I think that obviously has an impact on numbers and it has an impact on.
So if you could
give you a chance to reverse this week on.
If you could share with the committee all the raw data as well, that might.
I mean, just on that second point though, because obviously you're highlighting in 41, so they don't want it at all, implying 59% given the three options of bi-directional with flow or no preference are tolerable of one of those three options. Yes, they break down between the three, but they're all 59 for a cycle lane of some sort or the other.
Yeah.
But then, as you point out on 426, it then flips back the other way. So people clearly aren't necessarily uniform in their answers all the way through. They are perhaps even saying put cycle lanes all over the borough, but don't put them on High Street Kensington potentially. But we don't know unless we track each person's responses.
Yeah.
That's what they've said.
As equally as I think Councillor said before, that 59% who support putting up Kensington High Street, as mentioned there, could be the 7% from Coldwell, or the 6% from Chelsea Riverside, or the hospital, and all the people who think, put something there to keep away from us. Exactly, the Jones and neighbourhood.
But again, we must remember this isn't a consultation, this is a survey to get general attitudes across the board. I wanted to bring in our guests, but Abdullahi, do you have a quick question?
There's a quick one. It's on page 6, 4.19. The response on the hand says those who are from BMA background, we know why do we get that response?
We know why.
Yeah, I mean, why is it got that high proportion from BNB communities?
Well, the questionnaire didn't ask why, except for the very specific questions like, do you think, what would make you feel safest, or what would be the
So
most...
is it a segregated cycle line?
That is, yeah, that's specifically about physically separated cycle lane, however that's done, but it's physically separated, not just paint.
Yeah.
But yeah, the answer to the question, we don't know why people from BAME respondents were more likely to support it than others.
Could be lower power ownership, perhaps.
Yeah, we're definitely not certain that this is causal, we're just
Yeah.
because we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone want to bring in our guest, but got a very quick one.
I am just curious because this is a survey and obviously following campaigning for cycling lane has Kensington, the way how much money was spent there put into introducing more healthy style of living, just like a bicycle, and obviously contribute this way towards global warming and all sorts of things. Was it not really time for you now just simply not to do any more surveys, just to do the public consultation? And I'm really curious, how do you engage as a highways for Kensington and Chelsea with campaigning groups? Because more than this, you do the survey, I don't know how many people actually live in a borough who answered that. You know what I mean? You say, how did you book these people? How many people actually were professional and were relying on the cycling? Because after COVID, all of us go through crisis, and obviously it's much cheaper to go on a bicycle than pay the petrol or even charge your electric cars. So question is, are you not prepared to literally face the problem, do the proper consultation, engage with all the residents properly, like we did with the working flood risk management working group? We had a few sessions, people came, gave their feedback, how many people were relying on those lines literally as a way of going from A to Z, because they have no money to go on a different way. So when is the time you actually face it and do the proper public consultation? Because I cannot see reason, you just feel a doctor, but you don't really give any answers.
No, I mean, the point I'm really going to raise is that we have, unsurprisingly, spoken predominantly about cycle lanes, but actually the most supported option that came out of the survey was for a timed bus lane, and it was supported more in the northern wards than it was elsewhere. And we haven't given it so far any time at all. I think it was what, 68, 69%, something like that, was for 68 timed bus lanes. And again, with all of the responses, it seemed to fall, the levels of support fell when you made them focus in on one particular street. So people were generally more supportive of things in a broad principle. But then when you have to say, right, what about that particular street, those numbers did fall. I think on the buses would fall down.
So it went from being 68% support and 16% against in general, it went down to 51 for in 24. So
quite
so sort of half, the next half you get.
So that's quite significant, and that's something that I don't think we would have known prior to carrying out this piece of work. And it's one of those elements that, given you look at also the beginning of the question, where you have what forms of transport are you using more, walking remained top, and yet widening pavements wasn't hugely supported. Buses also have a net positive of 6 or something, and had a 20% increase. So there is some evidence there, but we're not perhaps devoting as much time in tonight's meeting to what is one of the most frequently used forms of public transport in the city. Given we're not able to build tube lines.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good point. Ariel, I'm sorry, because I've been waiting very patiently. So Rachel and Claire from Better Streets and LCC, please come and join us. Where can we?
Just over here, it's fine.
Just up at the top here. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours. Any comments you'd like to make or any questions you'd like to ask?
Just that I haven't prepared a statement because I'll be really expecting Rachel to speak.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, absolutely fine. Yeah.
Hello everybody. My name is Rachel Naunton and I live just off Kensington High Street. I travel in and out of the borough every day by bike to work at Ormond Street Hospital. For context, part of my role is advocating for the health and well-being of children and young people, speaking up for their safety and raising awareness of air pollution. I'm also a member of Better Streets for Kensington and Chelsea, and that's why I'm here, and I'm making a statement on behalf of the group. We have several observations about the Citizens Panel finding on the Centre for London report. Firstly, this process with the Citizens Panel as the latest step is delaying safe cycling for far too long. The council actually approved bike lanes on this road over 10 years ago. It's used daily by thousands of people travelling by bike. Even the council agrees there isn't an alternative route. Other boroughs are building their parts. Our borough creates an obstructed 1.5 kilometre gap between Brentford and Barking. The only protected bike lanes we've ever had in the borough were here for just 7 weeks, and you removed them in December 2020. Because we took action, you commissioned a study. Even that you did slowly, but you were aware of its conclusions in the summer of 2022, and it was published in October. It's now April 2023. 2.5 years after you took out the lanes, and you still haven't actually done anything for road safety here. Meanwhile, I and thousands of other people have had to cycle on this dangerous road daily, which has one of the highest casualty rates in the borough. Where is the sense of urgency? Does our safety not matter? Your responsibility as a highways authority is to all road users, not just residents, but people who come to work in our shops, our hospitals, our schools. And it's also a key cycle corridor to central London for thousands of people every day. Secondly, the Citizens Panel were asked about opinions not recommended by the Centre for London, such as painted cycle lanes, which would fail to meet government safety standards. The Centre for London recommended protected cycle lanes on the vast majority of Kensington High Street in all of its options. Why aren't you getting on with a proper consultation on putting those in place? Thirdly, as discussed, the Citizens Panel respondents aren't representative. A grand total of only 3 people under age 24 took part. On the Youth Council, they have already stated their support for cycle lanes on Kensington High Street. Over half the respondents were over 60. Most have access to a car, where most in the borough do not, and 84% were white. However, even this unrepresentative sample does support protected cycle lanes, generally in the borough, and asked about safety, more people preferred protected options than paint. Meanwhile, a professional representative survey carried out by ICM Unlimited of 1,000 RBKC residents in 2021 found over 50% residents supported protected cycle lanes on Kensington High Street. The resident support is there. Finally, we are very willing and trying really hard to be constructive, but it's very difficult when you keep putting off this urgent issue. Yes, listen to residents, but listen to all of us. What about all the 20 local schools, Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and other NHS trusts, the Royal Albert Hall, Imperial College, businesses like Waitrose, who support safe cycle lanes on Kensington High Street? And listen to safety. How many years, how many more collisions will this process take? 3 years, 5, 10 years? Listen also to the environment. The future isn't just filling up our roads with electric vehicles, polluting our air with tyre, road surface and brake pad particulates, and carrying maybe 40 tonnes of embedded CO2 in each one. You've declared a climate emergency, start acting like you mean it. Please tell us whether or not you collectively commit to protected space for cycling, and give us a timeline for getting there. We have a lot to say on this issue, but in light of time, I will stop there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Jem,
Yeah.
would you like to...
Well, thank you for coming alongside. I mean, it's, I know, obviously, we've spoken to Better Streets quite a lot. I'm afraid I don't think we've met in the past, but, Better Streets is a fantastic title. That's something that we're clearly spending a lot of money on through our PLACE programme. And yet the suggestion put forward is only for one of the multiple options that are in this paper. So I suppose my question for Better Streets is, if not that, what would be acceptable to your organisation?
This is perhaps a conversation which can be, because
of course, sorry, but as a resident,
yeah.
It's another person we can put on the citizen.
Yeah,
panel, so.
unfortunately, as much as I would love it, I don't think we can hammer out the design for Kensington High Street in the room tonight. But
this evening.
Firstly, do you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask? There's a couple of points you've raised which I'm interested to ask questions on.
I suppose if I can add something really on the safety issue, which I think is really the one that should be paramount in everyone's minds.
Yeah.
we know it's the most dangerous road, I believe, in the borough, and that's been known for some time. So I guess my question would be, how are we going to show proper action on achieving Vision Zero on a road that we know is so well used and so well needed by cyclists in particular, who bear the brunt of the casualties?
Okay, well, and I'll add to that also. In one thing that the panel obviously doesn't do is take the views of people outside the borough passing through, but Rachel and Claire are right, we have responsibility for their safety as well. So, what are your thoughts on that and the importance of that?
Paramount, obviously. I mean, safety is paramount. That's why all of our roads are frequently tested. Obviously, we sadly had a fatality not that long ago of that young man leaving work on his way, I believe, to the tube. And of course, then the junction again was tested to make sure that it did meet all of the necessary safety checks. Anything that were to be done to High Street Kensington would obviously have to be tested and be found to be safe. So as you say, that rules out potentially some government limiting options there. But I thought that's what this was so interesting about, was even if options are not necessarily permissible through government legislation, it's interesting to see what our residents' feedback is on those approaches. Whether or not you can actually do them is something else. But I found it was quite heartening, really, that there was still sort of net positive support for some form of cycling. Admittedly, it was for the sort of the painted version rather than the segregated, obviously buses being at the top, but then it wasn't 80% rejection, even with taking into account those demographic issues that you highlighted. So we use a demographic issue to say that they're not representative, and yet we still found a net positive result in their approach to painted cycle lanes. So you could say that go down to the younger ages, that number would go up, and in fact the other numbers would also be buoyed by the same sort of outlook on life. So I almost thought, well, it's quite interesting to see what instinctively would be the most hostile age group with feeling about the options, because you can almost infer that those not in those age groups would be more supportive. So to be net positive on paint and on buses is something that I think shows that there's probably a broad coalition of acceptance of some improvements in the borough, but on High Street Kensington more broadly.
That's good to hear. And so I suppose the follow-up on that is, I think, the survey, we've got the report, we've got the survey, both good steps. But on the point of urgency, we as a committee are not going to advise you on what the right answer is, of course, but do you feel there is now a sense of urgency to move forward and move to
I mean, to be honest, look, we didn't just wait and do nothing. So we knew this was being asked of our residents. Over the last few months, we have asked officers to do, I'm going to get the word wrong now, but a topographical survey of the entire street of High Street Kensington to work out exactly what the widths are, the dimensions. We had some of that data from the previous scheme, but I think we've now completed that. We were then able to overlay sort of what varying widths of cycle lane might look like. We were able to look at sort of how much road space is required for bus lanes, what the different types of cycle lanes would require in intervention to traffic as well. So obviously, as Mark points out, mandatory and painted lanes or advisory lanes rely on the underlying traffic order, whereas something like a fully segregated one clearly moves loading and deliveries out into the carriageway or into designated areas. But until we had that fully sort of mapped out, we were sort of talking slightly with a finger in the air. We were now able to, and we have done some sort of modelling, design work of what a lane could look like across the street. There are within that going to be some decisions that we have to think about. How far do you push it? Do you take away whole lanes of traffic? What does that do to the traffic modelling? Where do those cars go? The deliveries, what happens to them? But that's the work that's been going on since we've not only received the Centre for London report, but also put this citizens panel out to residents. Because we have to sort of know what we're working with as well. People can say that obviously we do know what we're working with, but in data terms, we actually have to have the drawings so that we can work out how you could make changes.
That's completely understandable and anything needs to be thorough, but I think the reassurance we're looking for, and I think we've got, is that there is urgency and work is progressing at pace.
We've actually unfortunately had to stop some of our other cycle schemes in order to dedicate an officer time to figuring out what options are available, because there's only, I mean, I don't think there's armies of officers behind the two that we have tonight. Yeah, so you know, there's only so many pieces of work that they're able to do.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to on the committee seeing any concrete proposals in the future. Yes, Eva, we must. Yeah.
I am quite curious because we have a Hammersmith in Fulham and they have also High of Kensington. They have older boroughs like Westminster have always High Street. So how different we are from different boroughs, and I would like to know, do you learn from older boroughs? For instance, when we went this management, we went to Hammersmith, we saw SACS. So I really want to know, do you actually work with different boroughs? Because for me, it seems to be, it's an issue, but you are in the middle. Part of residents leaving and transiting through the High Street, they are facing possibility of being knocked off, and this is reality. Some people lose their life there. So I really want to know, do you really work with different boroughs and see and learn how they resolve that issue? Because more or less we are, I don't want to say death trap, but this is quite the number of casualties. It's quite serious. It's a human life here. So do you work with all the boroughs to resolve it? Do you learn from Hammersmith and Fulham what they have done on their house? How different it's a White Oak Street in King Street or somewhere else from us? It's the same highway, right?
Well, effectively, it's the same kind of transport corridor coming in from West London, and yeah, we some of us spend our spare time cycling around the bits of cycling infrastructure around London. So we, as well as talking to the individuals that are the designs, but often these are designed by the same kind of companies working for various different companies, different boroughs. So yeah, we do know what Westminster are doing or Hammersmith are doing, and we talk to TfL as well. And you know, actually, what we've got to the west is not the same as what we've got to the east on that corridor. And it's the same thing on Nottingham Lake. Westminster put in painted cycle lanes in 2020 on Bayswater Road, for example. They are still there when we were doing the more controversial cycle lane scheme on Kensington High Street. So it's not just that one borough does all their roads in the same way. They mix and match to what they think is appropriate for the road condition.
But when you compare how many people lost lives, it seems to be a big problem, and when they said it, it's quite an urgent problem because someone else will lose lives.
Sorry, who lost their life?
There was a quite recent accident of a gentleman who was cycling and he never came home.
Okay, I think we need to.
No. He was a pedestrian leaving work in a hotel, and it was a horrible accident, but he was not cycling, and the road was then tested afterwards. So I take the point around safety, but we can't just say that there were lots of deaths, because these are our residents and our visitors that we're talking about. And the officers have to take this stuff very seriously. We can't just say that into the room.
Okay, I think we'll leave that item next. We've still got a couple of items to get through, and it's almost 8 o'clock. Claire and Rachel, thank you very much for joining us.
Did I hear that you were going to hear from Rob Whitehead from Central London, or did I misunderstand that?
Would you like to make a comment, Rob?
That's okay if you've got time.
For you, yes. Yes. Well, you've done this fantastic report for us. So yeah, just a quick comment, if that's okay. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, first thing to say, we really enjoyed working with officers and councillors on this really important topic, making transport on Kensington High Street more sustainable and safer and better practical travel is possible, consistent with other uses of the road. So this is doable.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can work together in future. But the report that you've presented, you've discussed tonight, has got shortcomings. I just want to address a little bit on. You touched on the methodological robustness of the citizens' panel. I won't dwell on that much, other than say it's poor and unrepresentative. That's pretty obvious. Your discussions have already reflected that. So instead, I'll just comment on the report's treatment of the advice that we gave and the evidence we provided, and some of the conclusions drawn from the survey. First, it's really important to say, as has already been mentioned, that at no point did we, Centre for London, suggest that painted bike lanes are an appropriate solution for making journeys on Kensington High Street safer and more sustainable. Because they're not. It's not just us that thinks that, it's the strong consensus within the broad transport policy community. As we set out, these types of lanes fail the DFT standard for safe cycling, given the volume of traffic that you see on Kensington High Street. They just don't pass the smell test, right? They're not safe for children, they're not safe for adults. Solid white line or dotted white line. Simple. Second, the panel survey results look a little misused in an attempt possibly to show that painted bike lanes are favoured. Yet some of your own numbers don't support this. On safety, the combined score of the protected options are favoured by 42% of respondents versus only 14% of painted lanes. On appearance, this is also true. Combined score for protected options is 44% by my maths versus 37% for the painted lanes option. And yet, your report concludes that painted cycle lanes are popular with residents, with segregated cycle lanes being much less so. I'm afraid it's not really well supported by the evidence that you even present. And more importantly, it's not coherent with safer and more sustainable traffic. Full stop. So my recommendation, if you can, is that you reconsider this direction you're heading in. Bite the bullet and implement one of the three schemes or some variation thereof of the ones that we've put forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that, for the contribution and for this evening. We do have to move on. We would like to make some comments in response to that. You can very briefly, otherwise I have to respond afterwards.
Really just to thank Rob for the report and the contents, and that obviously this did go broader than the report itself. It went to think about the borough as a whole.
Yeah.
Well, I think we made it very clear that it's painted cycle lanes option wasn't in the centre of the report. Yeah. We also made it clear that the reason why that guidance in relation to what kinds of cycle lanes you need on a busy road like Kingston High Street.
Yeah, understood. Well, thank you very much. No, it's good discussion. I'm sure topics related to this will come to us again and do this in the future. Right, let's move on to agenda item 7 now. Nice. We're skipping 6. 6 is going at the end.
Can I breathe?
Yeah.
Sorry,
item
trying to
7.
the same chair.
No, sorry, 8.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, it's slightly
Yeah.
slightly
Wait, 1 second.
less
1 second.
hopefully less
We're supposed
controversial
to-
matters.
So we've got A7 next in
We're
the
doing
agenda.
Right.
We can go for it doesn't really matter. We can go to A8 and then do A7. Just want to be clear on what we're doing. So we're doing A8.
Sorry,
Yeah. Okay. We're doing agenda item 8, just to be clear, which is the culture plan 2023 to 2028 update. Sue, Emma, would you like to introduce it?
I'm going to be super brief. She's waiting. As you say, I think it's slightly less controversial. Really, what we wanted to do, you will recall that we did a 1-year culture plan. So the original intention to do 5 years because of COVID. There was no point doing a 5-year culture plan with me. COVID epidemic, they were going. Obviously, time's moved on, and we're now returning to the original plan to make a 5-year plan. And this is very much a skeleton. This is the approach we're planning to take with it, but we thought it would be a good opportunity just to share this with you and get your feedback now before we move on to this sort of sketching out what we thought the report will look like. Okay, and Sue very kindly taking the reins for Terry tonight.
Thank you. And all I would add is it also reviews the Kensington and Chelsea Festival 2022 and describes a little bit plan 2022.
Thank you. Colleagues, Aaron.
Thank you, Jim. Hi, Annie. Some of the things that we've done with part of your portfolio are residents' well-being events and other things like yoga day and
maybe to the yoga, fantastic.
Yeah. Don't think that's been pointed out in the report. Maybe specific headline or something. Or have I missed something?
It isn't in here.
Yeah.
It can and should be in the final report.
Right.
But that's a really helpful reminder if it isn't.
Yeah, because
So-
I think because if you look at
You mean the enormous list of things? that
Yeah,
we
I
have
know, I
done?
mean,
It's
we-
not-
yeah,
yeah,
five
that
year
is
plan.
probably isn't complete, but that is a really helpful.
yeah,
reminder. So
I
thank
guess
you
you know,
very
I
much.
mean, not just yoga day. I mean,
But what we want to show is the breadth of things that we're supporting, because the key for me is the diversity of culture in this borough. We do all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Not just,
So just note.
Yeah. I had. No, you go ahead first. You go, Roberto.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Welch, for your introduction. I'd be really interested to know, there's obviously lots of fantastic events that we've facilitated and sort of worked with other organisations to do, like the yoga in Holland Park. I was wondering if there's any view for the council's own special events team to take on maybe organising special events, doing special events as well as just, I guess, working with commissions and rubber stamping risk assessments.
I'm going to let you answer that more fully, but my understanding is that they are quite a small team, and a huge chunk of the year is taken up with Notting Hill Carnival as well. So I don't think we have a big enough team to do that. But if it was a wish of the council that we wanted to try and find more money to employ more people to do them ourselves, then but yeah,
That's exactly right. So thank you, Councillor. We've just lost in the last MTFS round one of our culture officers. So actually we're reduced in numbers anyway. So their focus is both Notting Hill Carnival, overseeing filming, and as you say, more on the regulatory side. There are models across London where it's quite different, and we could look at that, but that would involve a growth bid. But we can take that away if the committee are interested in that, for us to take that away and look at that further. I think that's
The GLA seem to support a lot of money towards, particularly seeing a lot of bids in Europe for being successful. And that maybe we could look to Europe to see how we could learn to maybe access some of those pots of cash to have similar. Because I think that would be something that would be brilliant for us to be able to do. Just interested on that point with the carnival. Obviously, it's a very important event in our calendar. I wish from having visited the operations last year, we saw how all the councils essentially wrote in, I think, most of that helping out that event. But given that it happens every year, and presumably there's sort of a standard, we know what to do now. I would have hoped that, whilst I appreciate there's a lot of work that needs to be done, that the team would sort of be able to do that quite easily and free up their time to do other things. I mean, I'm always fully supportive of having more staff in the culture department. But I would be concerned if the message that we were getting was that the team with limited resources is having to spend almost all of its time on Carnival.
let me have a stab at that. And I'm delighted that you welcome more sport and culture team. I don't know, it's not fair they spend all of their time, because obviously Carnival only happens, only happens for, the weekend of the year, but a good chunk of, when do they start? Probably about now?
And actually even before then, starting to work with various groups. So from February onwards.
So they don't spend all of their year, but I think it's hard to, yes, of course they do it every year, but it doesn't, I think it's one of those events that's kind of hard to, there's just so much that needs to go into it. But so I think the answer to your question is they do spend the rest of the year doing other things. but nonetheless, Carnival takes up a big chunk of the time of the offices we have.
That's very fair to say, and there's a lot of liaison with Westminster as well, so Westminster comments on that. It does attract 1 million visitors, and actually the preparation for all of that.
All the permits for all the flights, and yes.
I just had a question about the priorities, because we're asked to comment on the priorities. And it'd just be good if the priorities could be articulated a little bit clearer, because there's lots of good stuff in here, but there's nothing which says these are our priorities. So maybe 5.6 is sort of might be the priorities, but something that clearly states it. So that would be quite useful.
I think it's a really helpful point. I think what we're hoping to draw out in the in the sort of I'm just looking for the appendix. Yeah, sorry, in the appendix, exactly. So in the background pieces, the background piece at 2, I think that's where we're probably, will it be in 4? It will be in 4, won't it? It will be in that introductory piece.
Okay.
And what the priorities are and how they align to the council plan specifically.
Okay.
So it's a really, you're absolutely right,
Yeah.
and it is the intention, and I agree, perhaps isn't conveyed as clearly it could be.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be really helpful, because we're at this early stage, if the committee, over and above, that it obviously sits within cleaner, safer, fairer, and particularly the fairer category of the council plan. But if there are specific elements that the committee wants us to consider, then it is at a very early stage, so do let us know.
I have a couple of suggestions, but I'm going to go to Abdullahi first.
Yeah, I feel is I'm just going to look at the end of 5-week call. I mean, in this borough, we're lucky. I think most diverse borough in London, which is something I think we need to be proud of and celebrate. So in this point, it says the draft plan will go to business associations, cultural providers, youth groups, and it also continue to say discussion with cultural providers. Then at the end, I want to know, who are they, these cultural providers? Are we referring to local charities, schools, youth groups, or libraries?
All of those people. So in 5.7, there's a few there. So you've got something cultural group, Westway, Museum Brand, there's a theatre, there's a Carver, there's Tabernacle, there's Chelsea Theatre. There's just we can provide. I'm sure we've got a list somewhere. And there's lots and lots of charities as well who do somewhat. But it is wonderfully broad. And it covers the whole borough. It really does.
The Chair, the reason I'm raising this, I'm really keen on to see our children who go to our local schools, youth groups, be involved in cultural diversity and displaying the richness of this borough.
Definitely, and in fact, it's probably not really brought out in this report, but one of the most amazing things is the Tri-Borough Music Hub, which does phenomenal work with all our schools, bringing music into schools. And they've actually got a unique performance at the Royal Albert Hall, again, with some of our school children, which is something they did a few years ago. So you're absolutely right, and I completely agree with you, and I think it's there, but I'm sure we can provide a list, and in the final report we could have a list of all the different people we can work with.
My last one, Chair, is
last one,
definitely. This C15, maximizing our spaces. I work in North Kensington. I lived all my life in this country for the last 2 years. So I know most of the North Kensington, not some in the south. I'm aware the uptake of use of a library, especially Kensington, is now twice a week, every Tuesday, every Friday. So it would be really ideal if we can link with this cultural plan, the use of that space. For after school club, local youth groups?
Well, we have the member responsible for libraries here, so, sorry, Josh, just going to very help using library space for all sorts of events as well, which I know you're trying to support and encourage as well.
Yes, so we answered, I don't need to take time up, Chair, but we answered this last week at the Family Select Committee, which asked a very similar question. But yeah, so it's not council policy yet, we're still exploring different avenues and different procedures to see if it will be. But our use of libraries, we're exploring whether that can be used as the front door of the council for many policies. So not just housing and social care or children's services, but things like events and other cultural institutions that we can use as well. Our libraries actually at the moment have actually the widest part of cultural elements. So the RPKC cultural team, that's libraries cultural team, is actually has the widest email distribution out of any council newsletter in the borough. So we do really great work. We have a lot of authors, a lot of artists and things that come to libraries themselves in order to do that. Of course, there could be more to do. So it's a really good suggestion there, but that's something that we are still constantly thinking about.
Excellent.
Just one question.
Yep. One.
We may say that create more funds that can help sustain small cultural providers. I cannot see really referencing how to help small organization who wants to run project for a longer period. You don't mention here about city living, and I think it would be quite helpful to make this resident association or other individuals who are artists to be aware of this fund. You mentioned that one of the Office of Bilingual Culture was lost. I wanted to know if it was lost, meaning that left the office, or he was more or less let go. I remember from another committee when we talked about INSO, that actually cutting budget was one of removing one of the officers.
So was it a budget cut or was it?
It was. Yeah, it was.
So he was let go, didn't quit, more or less.
As in, we were asked to make cuts. We've been made cuts across council, and was it a full-time or was it a part-time?
It was a full-time post. Nobody was made redundant. We just managed it with natural wastage, but it does mean we're one post now.
Okay.
So would you be interested to put more information for local groups about the funding available from the council?
So City Living is not in the gift of the culture team. I'm sure they do tell people about it. I mean, the scheme's been going 10 years, so it's hardly new. We also offer art grants and Black History Month grants, which obviously we work with. So we work very closely with the communities team, so I think we do tell people it's
Well,
not.
are they attached to those grants?
Not Black History Month grant, we have cut the arts grant.
So that, yeah, and back to City Living Local Life, I can pass on Clive, City Communities as well. There's a review of City Living Local Life funding happening in the summer, so I'll feedback the suggestion to that.
Because I think it's a critical money event, and I think so people might be interested to run some classes of art projects on a longer scale involve children.
Okay. Understood. Arian.
I just want to make a comment about the Black History Month funding.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who applied and organised an event, which will help a lot of other black businesses. And Josh, who was a panel member who spoke in the event, so really, it helped really about 70 odd business owners.
Yeah.
As part of that program.
Excellent.
Good. Well, that's really
Very
good to get that feedback. Thank you.
Right, I'm determined to finish
Really?
by 9, so
No,
I've
no.
got one more question and then we'll move to the next item. It's comments and a question. So firstly, in terms of going back to the priorities, I'd say one thing which I think would be useful to include in the final version is, because it's a small team, they can't do everything, so real sort of clear guidance on what sort of things, and that might be like, as Roberta said, enabling versus leading things.
Facilitating rather than organising.
Exactly, yeah. So one thing I think would be good is a clear focus, clear question up front. Could this be done by the private sector? And if the answer to that is yes, then maybe that's not the best way to spend our.
So you mean could the facilitation be done by the?
No, so if we're offering a service which actually is, you could put a business case together and a business could make money out of doing it. Maybe that's not the right.
We don't, the stuff we're doing is very much liaising. So on the filming, we actually outsource the filming work.
Yeah.
All our team are doing and just sort of doing the admin bit internally that needs to be done. Likewise with licensing related things and liaising with highways, we're not.
My point is, as we sort of look to new things to come, or proposals over the next 5 years, or ideas to lead events, if it's an event which could quite easily be run for a profit in the public sector, or there is already a not-for-profit organisation running that, we don't want to duplicate. It's just a method of judging things rather than saying.
I'm probably being very stupid, Chair. It's been a long day. I thought we were doing that already too.
So I think we are, but we can certainly make sure in the new culture plan we reflect, and we've spoken about partnership working already, but we can make sure that's drawn out in the culture plan that actually what we want to do is highlight what's happening already and where there are gaps, and the focus certainly on the KNC Festival is offering to groups or people who don't usually get involved in cultural events. So we want to kind of plug those gaps,
Yeah.
and as you say, not step into a space where there's already really good provision, because we're very fortunate living in this borough that all the institutions and all the cultural organisations that already exist. So I think that's the principle that we work obviously doesn't quite come across.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
No, so Roberta had a
Very, very quick. Thank you very much for squeezing in, Mr. Chairman. But just following on from the point of where we can to encourage residents to do things, and also on the point of using our spaces. Roads, I think, is so important, as we've seen in the last 2 years. With the coronation and with Jubilee, we have such incredible opportunities of things we could be doing in the streets that tie in with our greener agenda, or all our other things that we're doing. Having organised a street party, I can tell you the amount of bureaucracy one has to do is immense. And if we're trying to get I appreciate our team is small. If we want to try and get as much done by those coming, stakeholders that come forward, anything that we can do to say, for example, if someone hadn't done a street party before, an explanation, an example or a template for a traffic management plan, for example, or a risk assessment, all these things that if you're a small community group that wants to do something in the community area, they don't have to go and find some expensive event planner to fund it, and that you can and then facilitate that sort of thing and try and cut as much red tape as possible, because otherwise, I'm surprised anybody organises a street party, to be honest.
And we have had that feedback, and Councillor Kamali has also put that back, so we are working on that and making the processes as streamlined as possible. And again, we can make sure that within here we address that in community organised events that address culture.
I think that's it's a really fair challenge that we have a sort of toolkit or template, because you're right, we should be a help, not a hindrance.
Yeah. And just on just to amplify my point, Mr. Chairman, apologies, but just on that point of insurance as well, because that's something that came up in my family.
Comes up a lot.
My understanding.
She's Sarah's gone.
So my understanding from other councils is that councils act as their own insurers, for their public liability, their own insurers, and so that would enable community groups to shut down roads, have street parties without needing any additional public liability insurance, because the council is fundamentally the insurer. We don't seem to do that today. I don't really understand why or what's behind it. I don't know if one could go away and have a look at that and see.
That's already been looked at, so I think you might have fed that through already, and absolutely. And I'm sorry it's not quick enough for the coronation event.
For the next one.
I think those are two very good recommendations, and we'll make a note, and when the culture plan comes back perhaps to the committee in the next municipal year.
And that's why we brought it early, so that we can, it can reflect what the committee think now, rather than delivering as a fait accompli.
Yeah, so it was on the bureaucracy and level of paperwork with, for example, organising a street party, but not just a street party, public events, and connected to that, the cost and simplicity of getting insurance, and whether there can be, whether the council can facilitate that. And then the final comment, which I wanted to put in, was on historical tools. I don't see anything mentioned about, and there's something which the council could potentially play a role in. Sort of walking around the borough, the architecture, the history is one of our really great, one of the great things about this borough. And the other day I was looking to do a tour and I couldn't find anything online, be it self-guided or guided. I think I was looking for a self-guided one. So maybe that's something we could look into, you know, commission, do ourselves, or gather together resources that are already out there so people can do historical.
There used to be a group that went around Chelsea, because they used to do all the blue plaques in Chelsea
Okay.
around Tate Street, but
Yeah. But if there are groups out there, it might just be,
Yeah, it's
you
a
know,
great
make helping them advertise.
I agree, it's a great
Okay. No, Eva, I'm sorry, we've got to move on because I really want to get everyone done by 9, so I apologise, but we must move on to the next item.
I think there's an artist's walk, incidentally,
Okay.
if you're interested.
Okay.
Perhaps that's something we do about Chelsea.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a very good
Can
one.
you follow up with them by email, just because otherwise...
That's probably.
I'll send you the details, Tom.
Thank you, Linda.
CC me as well, then thank you.
Linda.
I think that's the one, Chelsea. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
everyone, and well, we'll be back. Yes, we'll be back with the full report in due course.
Very much looking forward to it. Thank you very much. So we now move on to item A7, business improvement districts. And Sue, you're staying with us for that. yeah?
Yes.
And we've got Josh joining us as well. Right.
Hello.
Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and as a very broad conversation topics tonight, I must admit. But really pleased to be here tonight, and thanks for inviting me. So at your request, committee, I thought we'd update you on the latest of business improvement districts in RBKC. As you know from the report, we have 3 bids in the borough at the moment. They're Kings Road, Knightsbridge, and High Street, Kensington. And as the report says, we're hopefully looking to explore further options for that, with those being in Earl's Court and some in North Kensington. That potentially could be Westbourne Grove, or potentially be Portobello Road, depending on the views of businesses, of course, and market traders in Colthall. So far, the bids, 3 existing bids, which have been in place for about 2 years. The High Street Kensington one about 12 months, has been quite successful so far. The bids have invested heavily in their jurisdictions, mostly in security and events, which we talked about earlier, but also promoting the high street and promoting our local businesses, and of course that adds to employment locally as well. But basically that's where we are, and I'm happy to take any questions on those.
Thank you. Colleagues. I'll start off then. So 4.5 refers to how the income generated by bids has tangible benefits for local residents, including bids being able to pay for activities. Could you talk a bit, could you expand on that, about the tangible benefits that they can provide?
Yeah, so as I referred to earlier, so the 3 bids we have at the moment, most of their funding, which says, so no council taxpayer or council tax resident is charged a fee for the bid. The bid fee is charged to the business themselves, which is 1% of their business rate levy, which goes into the particular bid, which is a separate company itself. That bid then, depending on the views of the board, will then invest in an area that the board feels necessary for that particular high street. So as I said, for RBKC, that is especially around security. So all our bids have security officers who will patrol streets, giving confidence to customers, giving confidence to businesses to say that we're clamping down both on antisocial behaviour, from robberies, from all that type of stuff. But in addition to that, they also promote the high street, and that is through events. So for example, what we've had in Kings Road, the big thing that the bid has done recently is, of course, Chelsea in Bloom, which is coming up in the end of this month, in May. But the High Street Kensington, as I said, that's relatively new, but they're paying for things like their Christmas events and other events to come people to the High Street. The High Street Kensington is also having a coronation event in 2 weeks' time. Again, mostly directed by them, mostly directed by the bid levy payers. So that's a big screen at Long Park, parties, events, and the other businesses that contribute towards that as well. So the idea is to draw people into those particular high streets. Those people will obviously spend their money, enjoy what Kensington and Chelsea has to offer, both culturally and in terms of retail and other institutions, and also that allows those businesses to further invest in those streets, making them much better than they are.
And are there, sorry, let me see 1 second, but I mean, one of the things I think in the report it encouraged us to advise on do we think the locations for future bids are suitable. I just wonder, are there examples outside the borough where bids haven't worked? I mean, what are the metrics we're looking for? What makes an area
really interesting
right for a bid or wrong for a bid?
So a bid has to be of a reasonable size. So that means there needs to be enough businesses in the bid to contribute to the cost of the levy. So it can't be quite a small area because that may not be successful. Then it may not be enough funding from the bid in order to make something reasonable. But I think personally a bid needs to be bid-led. So the only bid to fail in the country was a council-led bid, which was in Portsmouth. What that says, I don't know. I will not pass comment or judgment, but that's the only bid to fail in the country.
Yeah. Out of
many
hundreds.
That's right.
Okay. That's really interesting.
Just quickly on that one, actually, when you say fail,
yes,
what do you mean?
Well, the bid wasn't sustainable. It didn't have enough funding. It couldn't agree. It functionaries. It could, any of that kind of stuff.
Because in Hampstead, I know they had. I understand they had some trouble with that.
They potentially could have, although I don't know if it failed or not. But the only advice I've received is the only one that has failed has been in
and I guess what my point would be actually on that first point from the chairman, just so that we can, I know it's probably not possible to get an exact figure, but just so we can sort of get an idea of the capabilities. How much have we raised? Have we put in the levy? How much has been raised by the bid?
So the bid raises their own levy. The council collects a levy on their behalf and passes it straight to the bid, obviously, because we're a raiser like that. The 3 bids have had about £15 million raised in the past 2 years. They've been in existence. That's divvied up amongst themselves. But for bid payers, for example, the maximum a business can pay a bid is £50,000. So that's the likes of Peter Jones or Harrods. Obviously, it's a big floor plate, a very large rateable value, but they only pay a max of 50,000. Sorry, that's right. And if you're a smaller bid, if you're below a certain footprint, you don't have to pay anything at all. And I can't remember what the minimum. I think it's 500,000, something like that. But you basically get the benefit of the bid without paying anything.
Did we set that cap?
No, that's in the legislation that's referred to in the report.
Right, because I could see how potentially smaller businesses might be concerned that they're almost subsidising much bigger businesses which aren't paying some way to their price.
That's a reasonable point, but that's what the regulations dictate to us. So we have to go with that.
So I'll go to Linda in a moment. I just had another question. Oh, sorry, and Mary. Sorry, we'll go to Linda and Mary in one moment. I just had a question about so it's great. The bid provides this sort of fantastic forum of businesses working together to improve the local area. Once you've got that up and running, if they have a more ambitious project which they don't have enough funding for, we have a mechanism where they can apply to
No,
us.
the only funding that they have would be CLL. Okay. But again, they're a private company and a private individual, so they'll have to do that themselves. Yeah, they do. So they can either borrow, which they do. They can either raise their own funding by other mechanisms, which they do, or vice versa. But since they're their own.
What about, do we have a regular dialogue? So if they had some recommendations for changes to the highway, which they couldn't do without us,
yeah.
we
yeah,
would
exactly.
be able
So
to-
they, so part of this role, this lead member role that I'm currently present in, my predecessor or anyone that comes after me sits on the Knightsbridge bid and the Kingsbridge bid as a non-voting member. So we don't have to say the running the bid, but we have to work very closely in conjunction with the bid. And like you rightly say, Chair, is that's in regards to the division of the high street, transportation, public realm, of which the council has the ultimate authority on that. So the bid can do their own public realm improvements, but they want to pay for them themselves. For example, that is Sloane Street currently, which is happening, which is £40 million being spent on. Spent on that, but again, that's out of, but they will need our permission and our approval and our political will, etc., in order to achieve that. So we're very, very in close contact with the bid frequently. They will suggest stuff to us. On High Street Kensington, similar thing, although as the council has seen from this building, is a actual levy contributor to that bid. So we then actually have a vote on that board, which the current lead member for Foundry Children's Services is our current nominee on that board to do that as well.
Okay, well that makes sense. I suppose my only suggestion would be if we see a project going ahead and there's an opportunity for us to jump on the coattails and add a couple of things in which businesses wouldn't do out of their own pocket, but are really beneficial for residents, for example. That's something we should keep an open mind regarding.
And we are also formalising, sorry, just to add, we are now formalising meetings with the bids, with officers as well, so that there is that opportunity to share information and understand if there's any common issues that all the bids are facing that we as the council can help them with. So that's been set up.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the composition of the businesses. So, for example, with Kings Road, you would have had the Cadogan Estate, presumably would have had Peter Jones. You'd have had key people with heavy weight, which might have supported some of the other businesses going forward. With the ones in the future, if you look at them, I'd be interested to see whether or not some of them, how many of them would be franchises. This is one of the elements that I'm concerned about for perhaps smaller high streets or ones where you don't have those estates or you don't have those really key heavyweights. So, for example, when we first talked about the one in Old Court, we considered Metrobank. Metrobank's gone. So what is the key that you're going to be able to... I'd just be interested to see in that kind of the breakdown of... Most businesses that I've spoken to being hit by business rates, low footfall, and therefore low returns, and therefore are marginal. Therefore, they need to have that heavyweight business to be able to support them.
Interesting. Yeah.
So no, I'm just saying you.
It's an interesting point. Your thoughts.
It's why feasibility studies are so important, because actually really understanding which heritages can be included, and as you say, Councillor, the sort of range and some really significant ones like Cadogan for Kings Road, the Daily Mail for Ken High Street, that does make a difference. And so the ones in 1.7 that we're considering in 1.8, that feasibility study is absolutely fundamental.
Because when I did that Excel sheet, it became really very transparent that the majority of businesses were actually franchises. So it's a question of whether the model works with that type of business.
I think that's point well made. Mary.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I applaud the sort of reflective note in paragraph 4.2 where you talk about the different models. I've got the Knightsbridge bid in my ward, and it seems to have been a very positive thing. But also Exhibition Road is mentioned. Now, Exhibition Road is an area where there's conflict, perhaps you could say, or tension, not conflict, tension between commercialisation and residents. And in that context, something where there's a little bit more representation of residents. Now, I think the SIDS model doesn't look great to me. I mean, it's not legislation anyway, but anything we can do as a council, if there is a bid in an area where there's tension, to encourage the businesses to formalise I know we don't actually have the power to do it, but our influence to formalise resident involvement in bids, because it is its Achilles heel as a model, I think, resident engagement. I would really applaud, and I'm encouraged by this paragraph where you're clearly thinking about it and concerned about it.
That's absolutely right, Harry. Where we've have had influence is the 3 bids that we do currently have in place have resident board members, and many bids, especially those in Westminster, don't have that. For example, the one in Piccadilly, which has just recently launched their business plan for their future years, has not a single resident involved at all, despite being the centre of London. With us, we have residents that are sitting on our bids in our borough. Again, not appointed by the council, but appointed by the bids themselves. So, for example, we have a rep from the Chelsea Society on the Kings Road bid, a rep from the Kensington Society on the Opportunity Kensington bid, and likewise with Knightsbridge. So their views are heard at every board meeting. But again, not a voting member, of which a SID would represent in terms of residents, but certainly unique in that respect, that we're actually genuinely hearing from residents and their views on policies goes by the bid and or the council.
Okay. We move on now. I think we've got a fighting chance of finishing by 9, but are there any other questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So we're now back to A6. The policy action plan. Andrew, Rebecca, thank you very much for your patience and bearing with us. Would you like to introduce the report?
One you carefully drafted, but you're the technical expert.
By all means. So this report is a combination of modelling data, which we recently received, and I do, as it says in the report, want to make it clear it is draft, from our consultant CERC, who have looked at the sources of pollution in the borough and how much contribution they make to the various pollutants. So it talks about modelling, and then it also summarises the monitoring data from our 5 automatic monitoring stations that we have in the borough, and reflects on the last 10 years and how data has changed. And then it concludes with a summary of the Council's Air Quality Action Plan, which is now in year 1. It's not the first Air Quality Action Plan we've had, but this is the latest, which was adopted by the Council last year. And it looks at the progress we have made in this first 12 months. In a very big nutshell.
Excellent. Thank you very much. No, it's a really interesting report, and obviously we look forward to the report of the full data as well when that's published in the coming months. Colleagues, questions? I'll kick off. So yeah, the first one I had was around schools. So there's a few good actions here on how we're engaging with schools, not just on school streets, but helping them find safer walking and cycling routes to school for the kids. But the big caveat is schools need to engage with us. And I just wonder, we don't, headmasters and headmistresses, busy people, and, we don't want to bully them. But can we be quite robust in our approach and remind them and their boards of the importance of engaging with us on these topics as regards the health of their children?
Perhaps I could comment.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's more the transportation side. So the TfL put some funding into working with schools, and of course they rate schools for their school travel plans. So kind of gold and silver and bronze. So there's incentive on that because so that's related. If they put the effort in, they get something out of it. At the moment, there's a vacancy for our schools engagement. So that's full for the time being.
Yeah.
But we're going through a restructure at the moment.
Okay.
So we'll be re-engaging this year.
Okay. Yeah, no, I suppose just when we are engaging with them, obviously we want to be constructive, goes without saying. But my recommendation would be let's not be afraid of being robust, because often when people are really busy, they only listen to the people who shout them out. Colleagues, other questions? I have a couple more.
Yeah.
So open it up. Yeah, Eva.
Very quickly. I only read from A to Z. I cannot see any data on main sources of air pollution. Do you have any data about the area around the Brentwood Tower, that contamination, and how this affects people who are living in the local area?
So the monitoring post-fire was put in air quality monitoring by UKHSA from Public Health England. And there is actually a website where they have produced regular reports about the data and what the monitoring has recorded. So I would be happy to email you separately with a link to that if that would be helpful.
And can you put it on the website so it's part of your report?
I believe it is referenced on the council's website somewhere, albeit it may not be as clear as it should be. It would. And we are actually reviewing our air quality web pages at the moment, so that is something certainly that we could link to when we update our air quality web pages.
You go ahead, Roberta.
It's sort of I guess, a point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's sort of a point, more than a question. But I have a resident who lives near the park, who did up his house recently, the last couple of years, and installed clean air filters. And you would be, and it's obviously many people have great progress last year, but you would be horrified to see what they look like after a few months in situ. I mean, they're blacker than the lungs of anyone that smokes. Really rather atrocious. Which I can ask them to send me photos and pass them on to you. Really like. But I was just sort of wondering, is there anything more that we could be doing to encourage residents to do? If that's the sort of air that they're getting in, that we're getting in our homes. Is there anything that we can be doing that residents need to be aware of that they could be installing in their homes to try and improve their air quality? Obviously, if he's getting this sort of clean air filter, not, as I say, not too far from the park, fine, you've obviously got Kensington Road in the way. But I would have thought that would be a slightly nicer, the air there would be slightly better than it is in other places. And it really is filthy.
Yeah, I'm not an expert when it comes to the build of property and the type of devices that should be installed. I am aware that on the market now there are a lot of indoor air quality sensors, and it's something that we have been looking at. Indeed, the Lancs West team have actually obtained some and have been running pilots, I believe, in some of their properties to see what kind of data is being recorded. You're speaking, obviously, from pollution that's coming out and coming in, and whereas we're also looking at what is actually within the home, which is another whole kettle of fish. So I would be happy to take that away as an action to see what is out there, but it's not something that I would wish to talk my way out of at this moment.
No, of course, that's what I figured. Thank you very much.
It's also just something you can raise at the air quality meeting on the 15th.
I passed it on to this
Yes.
representative.
Interesting to thoughts on it. I was wondering about commercial cooking. So I was amazed to see in the report the impact that has. Is it particularly on PM 2.5, where I don't want to bore you finding the exact stats, but it seems to be one of the biggest causes of PM 2.5 in the borough, and there's lots of actions, we're doing lots of things, and I know not all the actions are in our reports, but are we doing anything, or can we do anything more on reducing emissions from commercial cooking?
It's something that we are looking to work with businesses to make it clearer as to where the problems exist. Changing the way people carry out their cooking, that takes time. It can't be a quick the switch as such. But yes, I think it's as much about raising awareness so that when it comes to changing methods, that businesses know where to find information.
So is there also a planning consideration now, or planning or licensing when you get a new restaurant? Maybe it's where it's then, obviously the type of fuel is the main thing, but where it's vented out, whether we put filters on it.
Yeah, there are already standards where you need to have the flues and the extracts and things like that, and that's something that when a new application comes our way that we would look at for quality purposes, and our colleagues in Noise and Nuisance would look at it from an odour perspective. So that's something that does exist.
Okay. Is there a big difference between one restaurant to the next in terms of types of fuel they use? Or?
Well, wood burning is interesting.
It does make good pizzas.
It does. Gas. It's a producer of pollution. So
Yeah.
Cause.
Okay. Right. So there's some that we're working with businesses.
Yeah, and the other area we're looking at is alfresco dining. We've got gas heaters outside. Electric would be better. So that again is about raising awareness about what businesses do.
Yeah, indeed, something we could also look at in licensing potential as well. Be worthwhile. Colleagues,
I have a
questions? Yes.
Implementing air quality action plans. Can you just summarize how you be doing that in regards to schools? Because so far I am aware that just still green walls. I had another environmental scrutiny committee October last year, and I think Oliver mentioned that just still green walls in school, which is South one of the schools. So I really want to know what jump have you made from October, how many more schools actually are looking into it, because Kingsley will be open so I know we cannot bully them, but in some the same way, do we liaison with head teachers saying, listen, the money there, because my experience was with Barbary Primary School last year, I knock on the door, I mentioned so many times that this money is in front of you, let's make application, do some quotes, it will help children, Lavro Grove is so polluted, but I got nowhere with that. So if I get nowhere with that, it's maybe not matter of awareness. Can we make it compulsory in some ways? Through the planning, for instance, if we build new schools or have new development which involves kindergartens, we'll have to take care of it because this is obviously data here. So can we make it compulsory in some ways in schools when our children, we have children, they go to school? And
not lucky enough just yet. I don't know about the compulsion element. That's something that we are doing. I mean, it doesn't quite touch on the air quality issues, but there will be co-benefits. We're looking at installing a large number of heat pumps to, I think, 5 schools initially. Obviously, that will mean getting rid of the gas boilers which are burning on site. It will probably be a very local benefit, given that local area is a school, and there's, I don't speak for the technical analysis, but there's probably an improvement there. On the sort of the broader things, I mean, it's where we are doing the work on the indoor monitoring. I think the report does touch on, was it this one? Touching upon indoor monitoring of schools, where we are doing this further work to see the difference between the pollution on the outside and on the inside. Broader points around, you touched on planning, we're obviously trying to encourage people to use heat pumps rather than gas boilers across the borough. If we can actually start embedding that as planning applications come forward, you raise it at the committee, have you thought about X as well, just to keep alerting people that there are those changes out there. We can't necessarily force them to make the changes, but we can certainly make it easier for them to make those changes. And some of our listed building consent orders and other policies have tried to push the needle slightly towards convenience rather than compulsion.
May I just mention as well, at the last select committee meeting, we did bring a report about the air quality and climate change audits that we're doing within the schools. So far, we're partway through 7 audits. The audits have been carried out, the recommendations have been made, and we're just working with the schools to start implementing those. And once we're further forward with those, we will be rolling those out to more schools in the borough. So it's a gradual process, but that is some of the key work we're doing in schools.
And we have actually been able to work with public health because public health money has to be spent on public health benefits. We were able to demonstrate that we could spend £250,000 a year of the public health grant that we receive on air quality measures, which I think are funding quite a lot of that work. Around that.
So if, for instance, I will throw at you, we have the biggest number of cases, children under 16 with asthma in Dalgona. So how would you tackle the issue? You have a ward, it is Dalgona, Gleasland and Chelsea. The figure is it's one from the previous reports. There is a broad primary school, there is a nursery, there is a hospital. Obviously, how would you tackle Labro Grove, polluted, not much greenery happens there. So, case study, what would you do?
Well, what's really interesting for me especially is that North Kensington has the cleanest air in the borough generally. I know the look on surprise on your face, but that's what the figures show. But that's then even more interesting that then there is that higher prevalence of asthma. So that's where the public health team are doing more work around sort of the reasons people have other sort of health issues. Because obviously the air is not clean, it's not completely clean. It's cleaner, and yet they're still seeing a higher prevalence of asthma and sort of respiratory illnesses.
So the answer will be North Kensington has the highest level of housing crisis in regards to condensation modes. So asthma is associated not only with bad air, but also with the housing conditions.
Housing is one of the key issues of asthma.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that housing, I believe the housing committee, our housing select committee, are looking into exactly this. I had a question before we finish on T16 and anti-idling measures. I know it's always been difficult, and it's such a visible cause of pollution, really frustrates people, the idling cars. So I was encouraged to see there are 123 successful interventions. Was that predominantly around that scheme at St Francis of Assisi, or was that a broader
No, it's
programme?
across the borough, and in addition to that, because that's our contracts and enforcement team, I'm post-production of this report are officers that work for NSL, the parking people. They, in addition to that, handed out 533 leaflets to drivers last year as well. So it is an issue which many officers across the council are trying to stamp out. But the offence is, if you stop idling, then the offence has disappeared.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a useless piece of legislation, fundamentally. It's a 20 or £40 fine, it's a nonsense of a fine. And the offence is only if after being asked you refuse to turn off your engine can they be issued. So there's absolutely, there's a £20 incentive not to do it, but there's really no penalty attached to it fundamentally.
The activity of speaking to the drivers, getting them to turn off the engines helps there and then, and also might prevent reoffending. So I think that's what. So which officers is it that are doing? Is it the parking team, contracts?
Contracts and enforcement.
So who are contracts and enforcement? Planning enforcement.
They're in the waste enforcement side.
Right, okay.
And NSL are the part of parking services.
Okay. It might just be, especially if we. I'm just thinking if we're saying that actually the legislation is kind of useless and the thing that's useful is the interaction, then if, for example, we're holding back on parking officers on parking wardens asking people to turn off their engines because they're not trained on the legislation, the process. Maybe we need to look back at that and say, well, it doesn't matter if they're trained because we're not really trying to enact the legislation, we're just trying to ask people to turn their engines off.
Yes, at the moment we are trying to change behaviour, but there is legislation in place to enable this to be enacted when the regulations are made by the Secretary of State. So that's a piece of work on the books of government. We're not there yet. Collectively, London's councils are pushing to have that done as soon as possible to enable us to have a reasonable tool there. Because even were we to issue a fine, it wouldn't be in the same way as a penalty charge notice, which is where we're heading.
But I just wonder whether we should all, maybe councillors as well, when be encouraged when we see someone just being a good citizen as much as anything, when we see someone idling, to remind them that they're not allowed to.
I'll go one better. I've stood in front of a fleet of taxis outside of Harrods and told them all off for not running their engines. But electric cars don't idle, so we should be encouraging them into electric ones.
Yeah.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Sorry, but 1 second, Roberto, and then we'll finish with you.
Very quickly, I was interested to hear about the schools with the heat pumps. The question Councillor Jennett asked. Do we have the names of the site?
It's part of the retrofitting scheme, so
Thomas Jones.
Avondale. I can get that confirmed, yes.
Thank you so much.
Seven.
Finish with Eva. Just to conclude, you mentioned a little bit about idling. Maybe you will sort of produce something nice and distribute around schools. Make head teachers aware. Listen, cancel it's bad. Some of words themselves sitting on the half of a million, it's quite a lot of money. And it's up to head teacher to apply for that. Get some quotes about greening and do more green walls and improve the equality around the children actually playing and learning. And the same applies to the staff employed. Everybody contributes.
So we have distributed anti-idling leaflets as part of our school's engagement with the transport team, that we have given anti-idling leaflets to hand out.
Yes, but I mean, if you are able to produce leaflet for one, which you can easily produce leaflet for something else, it's making headquarters aware that INSO is out there and greening improves the equality.
About ENSO, yeah, okay. I'm happy to make sure that schools are made aware of it when the next bidding round is over.
Maybe sooner because I haven't quoted.
But we're one of the, I think we're probably one of the sole boroughs to be spending £8 million on greening our schools. So we have to remember, ENSO is great, of course it is.
But we have only 2 green walls.
But we're going multiple factors greater in the amount we're investing in our schools as a council. So it's worth remembering that.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much.
Sorry, Tom, if I can ask a very quick question.
Arian.
Very quickly, sorry. In terms of the commercial cooking data measurement, gathering, how do you gather that firstly? Second thing, in terms of the is it Vaisala mobile sensors?
Sorry,
The company that installed Vaisala,
Vaisala, the mobile sensors.
Yeah, so what sort of radius do they cover? Because obviously you could put a sensor on the main commercial street, which would gather the micromots of data. But in terms of how far would the sensor gather data in terms of the radius?
Okay, so starting with the first one, it's based partly on the London Atmospheric Emissions Inventory. So they gather data and the sort of the percentage of the contributions across London, and then it's broken down into boroughs.
Okay, it's not the actual measurement; it's based.
No, it's not monitoring it.
Okay.
It's using modelled data.
Modelled data.
The Vaisala mobile air quality sensors, of which there are 4 in this borough, they are low-cost sensors. They're not as reliable as our 5 automatic monitoring stations. They will tell you what is in the vicinity. They are not far-reaching.
What about the big ones?
No, it is about what is within the facility. There's like a funnel at the top and the inlet tube, and it just
measures
samples.
comes into.
Yeah, So they're representative of different scenarios. So, for example, North Kensington, it's an urban background site. Then we've got curbside and roadside sites. So they're meant to be representative of those kind of areas, but they will only really be relevant for those specifics, depending on the roads and the volumes of traffic.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all very much for the report.